LA Noire is a revolutionary detective game set in 1947 Los Angeles, in which you play the role of Detective Cole Phelps, solving many crimes and striving to be honest in a police force riddled with corruption. The storyline in this game is deep and tantalising, and perhaps this is enhanced by the fact that the game both mirrors and is inspired by real events happening in the Los Angeles of 1947. Rockstar themselves have stated that virtually all of the cases you'll play in LA Noire have been inspired in some part by real-life incidents that happened in and around Los Angeles within the crime-plagued era of 1947, with developers Team Bondi researching through countless newspapers to draw inspiration for cases in the game. But Rockstar have only released the sources of their inspiration for 3 of the cases, with the rest of the cases remaining unconfirmed on what they may have been inspired on. So let's take the time to go through all the cases of LA Noire and see if they pale or shine in comparison to the real events of the crime-ravaged Los Angeles. Going through all of the cases of LA Noire, upon reflection is the first case we are introduced to, as well as one of the more mysterious ones. Officer Cole Phelps and his partner, Ralph Dunn, are ordered by Detective Floyd Rose and Rusty Galloway to collect evidence for the murder of Scooter Payton, who was shot from close range in the alleyway. As the case progresses, a notebook is found from one of the suspects, Errol Schroeder, and it seems to imply that Schroeder is the corrupt bookie for Detective Rose. While the original alley killing seems to be quite a cliche opening story to immerse the player into the world of LA Noire, the corruption of the police force with bookies seems to have some inspiration. In 1947, Judge Edward Brand indicated that he found it strange that 70% of those arrested for bookmaking are released by the police and sheriff's spy squads without charges being brought against them. And in these cases, a report of unlawful detention was already being prepared before the bookies were even booked. Brand stated that bookmaking has become a colossal and corruptive racket in the community, and he was informed that the going price paid by the ringleaders to the small fry of the racket is $100 a week per telephone. Under Sheriff Arthur Jewell protested that the sheriff's squad does the best job they can do with the small amount of staff they have, but agrees that the big boys in the bookie racket ring sacrifice the small fries to the law. This could be Floyd Rose sacrificing Schroeder to the law, while enjoying immunity himself. Armed and Dangerous. In LA Noire, Armed and Dangerous is a case about the robbery of the bank Westlake Savings and Loans, where Cole Phelps and his partner, Ralph Dunn, respond to their car radio and proceed to have a shootout with the crooks in the game, ultimately killing 5 criminals. On the 16th of June 1947, the Citizens National Trust and Savings was robbed by 3 men for $18,000 in cash, which is valued at around $220,000 in 2021. One of the robbers struck bank client Jay Lieberman with a pistol when he refused to hand over his safe deposit box. These robbers were then pursued by police when their car was wrecked and a shootout ensued, where 2 of the 3 bandits were wounded. The 3 policemen who caught these bank bandits were personally commended by Chief Horrell and were presented with police department citations of appreciation and commendation. This can be similarly found when Ralph Dunn says,
Lieutenant Hopkins says anytime you reach for the shotguns, you're either going to end up dead or wearing a citation.
And in the conclusion of Armed and Dangerous, Phelps and Dunn definitely get commended. Warrants Outstanding is probably one of the least connected cases to real history, potentially because it's quite vague. Phelps and Dunn are patrolling in their police vehicle when Dunn notices Wendell Bowers, who jumped his parole after being arrested by Dunn. Phelps then chases Bowers down on foot, resulting in a fistfight. On the 17th of October 1947, 56-year-old Joseph Kreidletter was charged for stealing a beer bottle case. A routine FBI fingerprint check uncovered that he was wanted for murdering his wife's lover 32 years ago, but it jumped his New York parole in 1936. He then travelled to California, where he'd been working as a fruit picker and other odd jobs since. Now, the only relation to this crime is the jumping of parole, but I believe the main fistfight has just been inspired by the original first ever teaser trailer of LA Noire, with similar events occurring. This would most likely have been before Team Bondi began their extensive research upon the history of LA Noire. On the 28th of July 1947, retired jewellery store owner Frederick F. Dieter Sr. went berserk after brooding for hours over a neighbouring housing project, ending up killing his son. In Buyer Beware, jewellery store owner Edgar Kalu goes berserk and murders Everett Gage because he was being religiously oppressed. In February 1947, confessed murderer Otto Pugielga bludgeoned newspaper publisher Alfred High because he called him a dirty German. And this was quite similar to how Kalu ended up murdering his customer. Edgar Kalu was Jewish, and anti-Semitism was ever present in Los Angeles. Daily News columnist writer Earl Wilson stated that every columnist knows firsthand about anti-Semitism. And when he wrote columns about top individuals in the show business who were Jews, he would receive countless mails from Jew haters. This is a deep underlying issue of Los Angeles, so I'm glad that it was represented in at least one case, with perhaps a retired jewellery store owner being the base inspiration for the short-fused jewellery store murderer. The driver's seat. After being promoted to the traffic desk, Cole Phelps' first case alongside his partner, Stefan Bukowski, is to investigate an abandoned car found at the PE freight depot in the warehouse district. While investigating the scene, it appears that the car is registered to Adrian Black, who was reported missing the previous evening. On the 14th of February 1947, at 6:15, Eugene White phoned home to his wife, Elizabeth White, saying that he was leaving for home, and to keep their children, Betty and Eugene Jr. awake, because he had a special St. Valentine's gift for them. Eugene's white car was later found near the Southern Pacific loading spur and warehouse. In White's abandoned car, police found his empty wallet in the front seat, along with his glasses, top coat, and coat of his business suit. There was also a heart-shaped box of Valentine's Day candy, along with a parcel containing a silver belt, with the words, "To my Valentine." In Black's car, his wallet was also found, along with some eyeglasses, but no other clothing. In LA Noire, police originally thought that the car was stolen, with the original owner receiving a broderick, which means a thorough beating. In Eugene White's case, police thought that robbery was the motive for the attack, as the wallet was empty. They believed that Eugene White was ultimately murdered, with his body being thrown into a nearby freight car. In the game, railway worker Nate Wilkie discovered the car abandoned and phoned the police. He had looked in Adrian's wallet, but found that the wallet was empty. In Eugene White's case, switchman Earl Wilkie noticed the abandoned car at 10:15 PM, but asserted that it wasn't there an hour earlier when he made his previous round. In both cases, these abandoned cars were covered in blood. In LA Noire, a steel pipe can be found to the left of the vehicle that was stained with blood, along with a purchase receipt found in a trunk detailing the purchasing of a pig. This led to the discovery that Adrian Black had faked his own death, using the blood of a live pig to hint that he was actually murdered. In real life, an iron bar was found in the backseat of the car, with one end being covered in blood, and the driver's window was cracked, presumably by the iron bar. However, this blood was not actually pig blood, but was White's own blood, with him having cut his finger to use as blood to fake his own death. Another piece of evidence reported in the actual case were tyre tracks. Skid marks 12 feet long were found behind the car, which indicated that Eugene White had driven the car to its resting place at high speed and then jammed on the brakes. This being missing from the LA Noire case seems quite strange, as this piece of evidence is used in many other cases. Continuing with the game, Adrian's wife, Margaret Black, is interviewed, with it slowly unravelling that there's been marriage problems. Eugene's wife, Elizabeth, originally said that he was a devoted husband who seldom remained away from home without advising her of his plans. However, she later admitted to there being discontent over the White's home living condition. In the White's house, 2 suits, 6 or 8 shirts, socks and underwear was found to be missing from his home, whereas in the Black's home, a suitcase is found missing. Adrian Black is later found hiding in his friend Frank Morgan's house, preparing to leave to Seattle, stating that he just needed to get away from LA. Eugene White himself was found several days after his disappearance, but was found already in Seattle, stating that he was weary of working 14 hours a day as an assistant production manager of a tool shop, and having no vacations, he moved to Seattle to be able to go fishing. Like Eugene, Adrian Black also runs a tool shop called the Saville Tool Company. Ultimately, Adrian's mistress in Seattle ends up dumping him, with his wife then forgiving him and taking him back. In real life, Elizabeth's wife was also willing to make a fresh start, although she had thought that Jean made a terrible mistake. The Consul's car is a case where Phelps and Bukowski are called to investigate the theft of the Consul General of Argentina's vehicle. While investigating the crime scene, notable neighbour Oswald Jacobs is interviewed as a reporting witness, where he tries to urge Phelps and Bukowski to stop the kids playing stickball in his yard, showing his disgust for it. In July 1947, Mel Heimer wrote an article where he shows his detest for New York children and how they seem to already view the world through a veil of cynicism, focusing on how he observed them playing stickball, and was left disgusted and frightened with the way they looked at one another, forever angry, forever suspicious. As the case unfolds, it's discovered that the Consul General's car was stolen in order for Gabriel Delgado to retain his personal honour and manhood after being advanced on by Juan Francisco Valdez. Stealing cars to gain personal honour was not unusual in 1947. As in the 7th of January, 22 teenagers were arrested and charged with at least 40 car thefts. These high schoolers, with ages ranging between 14 and 19, had a contest to see how many automobiles they could steal. According to the rules of the game, a car had to be driven at least a block before it could be considered stolen, with cars often being driven for several hours, and then abandoned or wrecked. This game lasted for 8 months until police finally intervened, with one 16-year-old boy racking up an impressive record of 17 car thefts. He must have been practicing for the release of GTA 50 years later. The game's case concludes in an illegal street case that traverses through the Los Angeles River, which is quite notable for flowing through a concrete channel. Nowadays, you really only see races and crimes occurring in the Los Angeles River through movies, but street racing along the LA River was actually a common thing during the 1950s. Back then, it had the name the River Road, being a nice and newly constructed concrete road with a small trickle of water flowing down the middle. This became one of the most popular spots for street racing. The police soon caught on that this place was popular for street racing, and they would station themselves at bridges over the channel, booking races as they exited back to the roadway. A Marriage Made in Heaven is introduced with Lester Pattinson being found dead in the street, from what looks like a hit and run case, with Lester having stumbled onto the road and been struck by a passing car. But not as all as it seems. Upon further investigation, Lester actually died after being stabbed to death, with his lifeless body then being thrown in front of the car, with a bloody knife being found at the scene of the crime. Lester had a rocky relationship with his wife Lorna, who had originally filed for divorce before changing her mind and using her new love interest, bar owner Leroy Sabo, to murder Leroy in order to obtain a substantial amount of life insurance. Rockstar have revealed that this case was actually heavily inspired by the death of J.D. Chitwood on the 10th of August of 1944, when he was found dead by what was thought to be an apparent hit and run. Instead of stumbling in front of an oncoming vehicle with the aid of alcohol, Jay was walking along the Western Avenue Road, with there being a lack of sidewalks being built around the trailer park where he lived, and then he was struck by a passing vehicle. This is a difference in LA Noire, as the Patterson family were not actually living in a trailer park, but they were living in a house that was left to Lorna by her father. In Chitwood's case, weeks later after this incident, the City Council ordered sidewalks to be built along Western Avenue, with a new path aiming at preventing traffic casualties, and this incident was left to be forgotten. Or at least you would think. 2.5 years later, in January 1947, the police received a mysterious phone call from a man who identified himself as Mr. Shug. Mr. Shug tipped off police that J.D. Chitwood didn't just fall in front of the car, but was in fact murdered. With his then wife Helen Chitwood admitting, "I killed my husband. I stabbed him in the chest with a knife." She then left him in the middle of the road to make it appear as though he'd been the victim of a car accident, burying the knife in a nearby lot. However, a subsequent coroner's report showed that the body of J.D. Chitwood revealed broken ribs and a punctured lung, most likely from a vehicle. They also found a .38 caliber bullet lodged in his stomach. Suspicious? Not really. It was later discovered that this was from a robbery in Arkansas, where Chitwood was shot. Helen Chitwood later admitted to fabricating her wild story to scare and anger her present husband, Roland Shug, who later rang up the police. She must have been a suspiciously good actor in order for her husband to believe her fabricated story. LA Noire's representation shows the side of the story if Helen Chitwood hadn't been just telling stories and actually did indeed murder her husband. With her preceding love interest, Roland Shug, transforming from a man who would ring police when hearing of these events, to Leroy Sabo, a man who actually committed the murder. A slip of the tongue is initially presented to Phelps and Bukowski as a case of a stolen vehicle, being spotted in the driveway by a beat cop. But something doesn't add up. The suspect doesn't change the plates, and made no attempt to conceal the vehicle. Curiously, the man found with the car, Cliff Harrison, claims that he purchased the car and showed Phelps a white slip, which is his registration for the vehicle, along with a pink slip, being a certificate of ownership. These turned out to be fraudulent papers, with Gene Archer selling the stolen car to Toombs Automotive while using counterfeit pink slips in order to make the sales seem legitimate. Fraudulent papers were a recurring issue within Los Angeles in 1947, with a warning being issued by the Promenade Progress Bulletin on the 9th of August about car fraud. The Californian Highway Patrol warned potential car purchasers if they were considering buying a car from a stranger to be wary of counterfeit pink slips and white slips, as two young men sold a stolen car to a resident and gave the purchaser counterfeit certificates. Harrison also had his registration and ownership certificates on his person after he was approached by detectives, which I think would be quite strange to do in today's day. But this was actually a common occurrence, with State Director of Motor Vehicles Edgar Lambton urging people to take more care for their often lost or misplaced pink slips. But this is not where the theft and fraud stops in our LA Noire story, as Gene Archer was actually just a transport mule for a larger crime organisation. This large-scale auto theft racket were constantly stealing cars, with them being driven out of state where they could be sold, with the intent of the fraud and theft being covered up. Car theft rackets were a huge problem during 1947 in Los Angeles, with there being a short supply of new cars. Matt Taylor wrote a short story in the Los Angeles Times that was about the cars being stolen all over the town. Although near the end of the year, things may have gotten better. Police and federal officials reported that the movement of stolen American automobiles across the Mexican border had decreased in the last year, with the Mexican authorities being credited for breaking up several theft rings. Perhaps a slip of the tongue was a fictional depiction of what could have happened here. The last case of the traffic desk, the Fallen Idol, is initially introduced to Phelps and Bukowski as a high-speed automobile accident, where the female driver is making allegations of attempted murder, with a shrunken head being jammed onto the car's accelerator pedal. This case ends up uncovering the darker side of Hollywood, with blackmail, drugs, sexual assaults, and attempted murder being regular occurrences behind the scenes of movie productions. Drugs were an often issue in Hollywood, as on the 15th of July 1947, 42-year-old Hollywood patrol guard Howard Nelson was arrested for selling illicit drugs to prominent movie stars, with drugs including cannabis, codeine, and chloral hydrate. Chloral hydrate is used as a short-term treatment to insomnia, a condition where people have difficulty sleeping, but it can also be used to knock people out. In the game, chloral hydrate is used by movie producer Mark Bishop to sedate young Hollywood hopeful Jessica Hamilton, and then exploit her. With Hollywood drug dealer Howard Nelson both dealing to Hollywood stars and believed to have been part of a larger doping ring operating in Hollywood, the Fallen Idol could be Team Bondi's depiction of these issues. The shrunken head, which was found as a piece of evidence in the initial crash, is actually a replica of real shrunken heads from Amazonian tribes. The shrunken heads were quite popular in America during that time period, with the University of Texas having two of the shrunken heads of Ecuadorian warriors by December 1947. They had been trying to sell one of these for the past 10 years for $300, but they had not been finding any takers. One of the curators at the Anthropological Museum couldn't fathom why no one wanted to buy the shrunken head, yet everybody who visits the museum wants to see it. Moving closer to Hollywood, a year later in September 1948, the shrunken heads were still a centerpiece of many individuals, with the Hollywood Citizen News covering an American Legion dinner meeting, in which the spotlight was primarily held by a shrunken head being displayed from a recent trip to South America. When Cole Phelps is first handed the fake shrunken head, he holds it aloft while saying,
"Alas, poor Yorick, I knew him, Horatio."
This is a quote from William Shakespeare's play Hamlet, which was very popular at the time, with Sir Lawrence Oliver filming a new production of this play and released it in 1948. He depicted Hamlet taking the skull of dead court jester Yorick, saddened by his death.
"Alas, poor Yorick. I knew him, Horatio."
This now leads us to Phelps going to homicide, and with these homicide cases, we need to go through the setting provided to us before the first homicide case. The setting being introduced to us is actually what inspires pretty much all of the homicide cases, and that's the now notorious murder of Black Dahlia. In the red lipstick murder, the first murder victim Phelps is to investigate is a woman who was found dead bearing the signs of a werewolf killer. Phelps then converses with his new partner Rusty Galloway, with Galloway informing Phelps that the werewolf killer, a name dubbed by the Daily News, was another name for the Black Dahlia, which the Examiner chose the name for. He references that the Black Dahlia murder was a murder of cutting someone in half and leaving them on the sidewalk, and he believes that the murder and this case are separate incidents. The Black Dahlia is a real murder case that took place in Los Angeles, and it's still an unsolved case. On the 15th of January 1947, Elizabeth Short was found dead and naked on a vacant lot, with her body being severed into two pieces, which is similar to how Galloway describes the killing in L.A. Noire. While more commonly having been named Black Dahlia, the killer was apparently originally dubbed the Werewolf Murderer, until Elizabeth was later called Black Dahlia by the press due to her fondness for wearing sheer black clothes. Along with the crime film Blue Dahlia, which was released at the same time, the name Black Dahlia was penned. Unfortunately, I couldn't find one of the original labellings of the werewolf murder, but I did find the Independent mentioned the murder of Elizabeth Short being a werewolf-type killing. The gruesome type death of Elizabeth Short, along with police releasing mugshots of her, led to a large media coverage at the time, and this resulted in subsequent killings that were either done by the werewolf killer themselves, or done by copycats. This leads us back to the red lipstick murder, in which we find victim Celine Henry, a 43-year-old female aviator, who was badly stomped, with a blunt force wound to the head. Curiously, a ring was removed from their finger post-mortem, and there was explicit writing on the body, written using red lipstick, with BD presumed to mean Black Dahlia. On the 10th of February 1947, 45-year-old aviator Jean French was found kicked and trampled to death. She had also been knocked in the head with an object that didn't originally kill her. On her body was also the same writing in red lipstick. However, it was written slightly differently, in such a way that BD could actually be read as PD instead, which could mean Police Department instead of Black Dahlia. And PD was actually what the coroner stated was the writing. Ultimately though, there was one major difference in these cases, and that was that there was no mention of a ring missing in Jean's case. The local papers and journalists listened to the same radios that the police did, so they actually arrived at the crime scene quickly, took photos of the bodies, and quickly tied this murder to the Black Dahlia case. We can see this in L.A. Noire, where when we arrived at the crime scene, there are already journalists there waiting. In L.A. Noire, Celine Henry was found in the park which was used as a lover's lane, whereas in real life, she was found in the morning off the side of a road. In both of these situations, there was evidence that the body had been dragged across the mud and grass, with a purse and other effects being left behind as well. Footprints were also found in the real-life version and game version of the case. In the game, the coroner guesses that the time of death was after midnight. In Jean's case, police believe that she was killed at around 6 AM, due to the fact that neither the body nor the clothes were covered in any dew. Celine Henry was last seen at the Bamba Club, where she drank quite frequently. Jean French was last seen in the Pan American bar, where she was seen to be with a smallish man with a dark complexion. This man in L.A. Noire is Alonso Mendez, who took Celine to the Turkey Bowl restaurant for dinner, where she later returned home. Marshall Watkins reported seeing Jean French drive away from the Turkey Bowl cafe in a zigzag manner. The night before Celine Henry was murdered, she had an argument with her estranged husband Jacob Henry, who was a mechanic in the Marine Corps. She was hitting Jacob with a frying pan in a drunk rage, with Henry Jacob retaliating, striking back and giving her a black eye. The night before Jean French was murdered, she also quarrelled with her estranged husband, Frank French, a retired Marine sergeant, where she drunkenly hit Frank with a purse and then left. When Watkins told the Valley Times of the encounter with Jean French, he described what he said was a prominent black eye on Jean's face. In the conclusion to the red lipstick murder, Phelps and Galloway search Alonso Mendez's apartment and find size 8 shoes, which match the footprints at the crime scene, along with used lipstick and a wrench stained with blood, and he was formally charged for the murder of Celine Henry. The murder of Jean French had 2 suspects other than her husband, with Frank being eliminated as a suspect in the case early into the investigation. One of these was painter George Witt, and he had the same size shoes as the ones that were found at the crime scene, and he also burnt several pairs of shoes, with Witt later saying he did this as he feared he would have had the murder of Jean French pinned on him once they found out about him having an affair with Jean. It's worth noting though that it's hard to know if he indeed actually had the same size shoes as the person who murdered Jean, as John Lewis's book Hard Boiled Hollywood states that they were not actually a match. Curiously, the burning of the shoes can also be seen in The Golden Butterfly, where suspect Hugo Moller burns his shoes in an incinerator with fear that the police would pin the case on him when they found out about his shoes. Unfortunately, the murder of Jean French still remains unsolved, with detectives speculating that the murder was most likely committed by a pickup in the bar. But the only problem with this answer is that the message that was left in red lipsticks is still left unexplained. The word Tex, underneath BD or PD, was only mentioned in passing in the LA Noire game, with the detectives not alluding to any reason as to what it could mean. And in real life, the speculation is pretty much as vague, with one theory saying that Tex is short for Texas, and this is because Jean spent most of her life growing up in Texas. Could someone from Jean's past have caught up with her and led to her murder? The Golden Butterfly is another murder case, with reporters also seemingly getting to this murder first to get pictures and quotes. 44-year-old Deirdre Moller's body was found naked, having been beaten and strangled by a rope, and left near a peppercorn tree in Lover's Lane. All of her jewellery was stolen from her, with a watch and a ring missing, but no cash was taken from her purse. Deirdre was picking up her daughter from a dance at the Belmont High School, where she was abducted and then later murdered. On the 3rd of May 1947, 36-year-old Dorothy Montgomery was found murdered and naked, having been hit in the back of the head and strangled by the hands from behind, and then placed in a vacant lot underneath a peppercorn tree. The Daily News reported that she was found with $45 left in her handbag, but her golden wristwatch was missing, along with a diamond ruby engagement ring and a gold ruby wedding ring. One piece of jewellery they found, however, was a small golden butterfly pin, with the papers labelling the killing as the butterfly murder. Dorothy was also picking up her daughter, who had been attending a dance, before she was abducted and killed. In LA Noire, like we mentioned previously, Deirdre's husband Hugo acts quite suspiciously, burning his bloodstained shoes, and was later linked with a tire iron that was used to murder his wife. The blood on his shoes, he adamantly stated, was the blood of rabbits. Dorothy's husband, Thomas Montgomery, was cleared of any suspicion, but a sheriff department lab technician found blood on the steering wheel of Thomas's car, along with the nail holes of his shoes. But these ended up being rabbit blood. Both husbands in the game and real life had arguments with their wives. Lieutenant Pete Sutton later said, "The murder must have been the act of a sadist, the type that hangs around playgrounds and molests children." Witness James Kennedy said that he saw a middle-aged and partially bald man step from Montgomery's automobile and walk rapidly away into the night of the murder. In the game, an alleged predator, Eli Ruley, is found around the playground of the high school where the dance took place, and he could be Team Bondi's depiction of this man that was suggested in the papers. Yet again, this case is not solved in real life, but many believe that Thomas Montgomery was the man responsible for Dorothy's death. James Kennedy later identifies the man he saw was actually in fact Thomas Montgomery, and the taking of the jewellery and not the cash suggests that the killing was personal and not the killing by a stranger. And this murder was later disguised as a werewolf killing, with LA Noire latching onto this. In August 1947 in the game, the body of 21-year-old Antonia Maldonado was found, having been strangled by a stocking, as well as receiving a blow to the head, with a lipstick message appearing on the body seemingly linking to the Black Dahlia. In July 1947, the body of 20-year-old Rosenda Mondragon was found a few blocks away from the City Hall, having been strangled by a silk stocking, with her face showing signs of beating, and burns indicating that she was thrown from a moving vehicle. In the game, there was a ring torn from the victim's finger, as well as her religious medallion missing that she usually wore around her neck. In Rosenda's case, she was found wearing a ring with a blue stone, and around her neck was a religious medal worn to protect her from harm. Rosenda had recently divorced her husband, with divorce papers being finalised hours before her death, with the intoxicated Rosenda quarrelling with her husband, Antonio Mondragon, before she left. The sister of Rosenda, Trinidad, said that Antonio departed in his car around 15 minutes after Rosenda had left. And while Antonio said he returned after he saw her get into an automobile, Trinidad states that he didn't return until early in the morning. In the game, Antonio's husband, Angel Maldonado, had also been served divorce papers, with their neighbours stating that Angel and Antonia had been fighting, with one of the neighbours stating that she didn't see Angel return after he followed Antonia. Antonia Maldonado then went to El Dorado Bar, where she went to call a cab, and they directed her to the Just Picked Fruit Market for Antonia to use a phone there. The owner of the fruit market, Clem Fleeney, offered to take Antonia home when she couldn't get a taxi, but she declined, and another car appeared and took her away. After Phelps and Galloway investigate the fruit market storeroom, evidence is found that locks Clem Fleeney away. Rosenda Mondragon, however, went to a vegetable market, where a market clerk, William Moore, saw her call a taxi to pick her up near his home around 2:15 AM, before another motorist, a husky fellow with blonde hair, drove up and she hitchhiked a ride with him. This is yet another case of a drunken woman wandering Los Angeles that has not been solved. And while officers originally booked Antonio Mondragon, as his story was at odds with his nosy neighbours, he was later released, with only the media linking Rosenda's death to the Black Dahlia case. While in LA Noire, the linking to the Black Dahlia case goes deeper, with the introduction of a bar connecting the crimes, the writing on the body, and a paint trail leading to evidence that the werewolf killer was leaving. During this case, the Central Police Station received a message from the werewolf killer, stating that they had changed their mind and they were not given a square deal. This is inspired by the Black Dahlia letters in real life, where on the 26th of January 1947, the Examiner received a handwritten letter saying, "Here it is. Turning in Wednesday, January 29, 10 AM, had my fun at police, Black Dahlia Avenger." Instead of the killer turning themselves in though, the Examiner received a cut and pasted letter saying, "Have changed my mind, you would not give me a square deal, Dahlia killing was justified." The next homicide case in LA Noire is the death of 27-year-old Teresa Taraldson, who was strangled with a length of rope and dumped out of an automobile on Signal Hill. She was wearing a distinctive green silk dress, with one of her shoes missing, and a laundry label found that helped identify the victim. On the 12th of May 1947, the body of 37-year-old Laura Trelstad was found in the dust of an oil-filled road, with her body seemingly having been hurled from an automobile. She had also been strangled, but with a waistband from a pair of pyjamas. The first identification of her was made from a laundry tag that was found from a black jacket that she was wearing. Coroner Surgeon Frederick Newbar said the preliminary examination indicated that Laura had only been dead but a few minutes when her body was first found, whereas in LA Noire, Coroner Malcolm Carruthers suggests that the time of death was around 2 AM. Tyre marks and numerous footprints were found near the body in both LA Noire and in real life. Laura's husband, Ingman, had been playing cards, with his wife leaving at 5:30, saying that if he was going to play cards, she was going to dance. He later went home with his children to prepare dinner, and then later, when he wanted to look for her, he couldn't as there was nobody to look after his children. Teresa's husband, Lars, had been playing cards at a party, where his wife was bored and decided to leave to go dancing at 8:30. Lars then walked a love interest home, with Lars stating that he had no one to look after his children due to not having a sitter. Unlike real life, the children were not at the party with him, but were at home with the babysitter. Laura was last seen at the East First Street bar at around 10:30 the night before, where two men were seen pestering her, and witnesses reported that Laura left with a slight-built youthful sailor, Harry Eugene Packard, who took her to a train station and then put her on a bus. But one bartender did report that he overheard an elderly man call her a cab to go dancing. In the game, 2 creeps were also over Teresa at the Baron's Bar, promising her to go dancing. One of them was Richard Bates, while the other was James Jessup, a young sailor, who took her home on a bus. Another witness in L.A. Noire is a cab driver, who stated that a woman in Teresa's green silk dress was with a sailor, who was making a lot of unsuccessful advances. In real life, taxicab driver George Silver stated that he saw a woman in Laura's dark coat staggering down the street, but he saw a man in a tan colour vehicle pick her up. L.A. Noire has a whole new segment that the real case counterpart did not have, and that was a homeless man who was seen following Teresa home after she had gotten off the bus. This man was later charged for a murder, whereas in the real world, this case still remains unsolved. Phelps and Galloway yet again investigate another murder. This time it is a 40-year-old Keystone Film Studio secretary, Evelyn Summers, who lost her job when Keystone was closed down, and unable to find work, she became an alcoholic. Eventually, she divorced her husband and ended up both broke and homeless. She was found strangled in a rail yard, with her head also receiving blunt force trauma. This is inspired by the murder of 42-year-old Evelyn Winters, who was a stenographer at Paramount Studio. She ended up leaving the studio and had been addicted to alcohol, eventually becoming homeless and having also divorced her husband. Her body was also found at a rail yard, having been beaten and then choked with a cord. A potential suspect to the murder of Winters was 28-year-old George Wickliffe, who reported finding the body of Miss Winters. His lips were found to have Evelyn's lipstick, and on his person, he had also had a woman's blue coin purse. While he denied killing Evelyn Winters, he did admit to kissing her before he realised that she was dead. In the game, John Ferdinand Jamison found the body of Evelyn Summers, and
I was kissing her.
the difference here though was that John knew that she was dead before he kissed her, and that fellow railway switch worker Nelson Gaines had to report the murder. Later in the game, it's discovered that she has a bedroom out the back of Levine's liquor store, with her possessions found along with a book on metaphysics, which has Grosvenor McCaffrey's name inscribed on it. Evelyn Winters also used a liquor store for storage, where she deposited 2 bags of her clothing for safekeeping. There was also a book on metaphysics left there, but it had her own name inscribed upon it. As interest in George Wickliffe cooled, police interest changed to a 30-year-old James Joseph Tiernan Jr., a red-haired ex-bowling alley employee who would often spend much time at the public library reading with Winters, and would also drink with her, having known her for the last 2 years. Sharing the same name in the game, pin-setter James Tiernan also spent most of his time at the public library where he met and befriended Summers, and they were also drinking buddies. But unlike what was recorded in the real-life newspapers, Tiernan's relationship with Summer went further in that they were actually lovers. As the story progresses, it unfolds that Summers strongly admired the man whose name was in the metaphysics book, by the name of Grosvenor McCaffrey, who only looked down upon her. Phelps later interviews him at the Mensch's Bar, which Summer also frequented. Grosvenor McCaffrey was an alleged witness in Winters' case, having been seen having a drink with a woman only a block away from where Winters' body was found, but he denied knowing Winters. In the game, Grosvenor McCaffrey is framed for the murder of Evelyn Winters, and he tries to convince James Tiernan to admit to the murder, and we have the option to charge either of the two. But in reality, both Tiernan and McCabney are released, with yet another unsolved murder having taken place. The Quarter Moon Murders is Phelps' last homicide case, and it's not actually investigating a new murder, but rather, the werewolf killer has left some clues for the police department, taunting detectives, telling them to find where he has hidden himself. This leads Phelps and Galloway through a series of locations, with each location containing items that were taken from the victims, until ultimately Garrett Mason is found, which links all the murders in the homicide desk to him. The Black Dahlia killer also taunted police, sending a message reading, "Here is Dahlia's belongings, letters to follow," with a birth certificate, business cards and address book sent, whereas only a security card was used in L.A. Noire. Envelopes in both the game and reality were cleansed with gasoline, in order to remove the fingerprints. But unlike the game, the Black Dahlia killer never ended up confronting the police department, allegedly sending some more letters, but the case ultimately went cold. In LA Noire, Garrett Mason is confirmed as being the werewolf killer. But Captain James Donnelly reveals to Phelps and Rusty that Mason was actually the half-brother of a very powerful and undisclosed politician, so Mason's actions were kept away from the public and not in official records. This could be inspired by one of the Black Dahlia suspects, Leslie Dillon, who many believed avoided any punishment due to him being a relative of the governor of Oklahoma, but this hasn't been confirmed. After this case, Phelps was then promoted to the Vice Desk, where he works alongside Roy Earle in order to track down different drug rings and rackets. In the Black Caesar, 2 individuals have overdosed with government-issued morphine. Morphine overdosing was not unusual in Los Angeles. For example, at the end of 1949, a doctor overdosed on morphine, but in the doctor's case, he may have intentionally overdosed, as he had been on bail after being arrested for committing immoral acts with 2 13-year-old boys. The 2 individuals in LA Noire that overdosed on morphine more than likely just overdosed due to their addiction. As you progress through the case and the ranks of the drug traffickers, Phelps and Earle come across a numbers operator, which uses a slot machine that contained the bandit's secret stash of money. In real life, organised crime became involved in the production of slot machines from the 1920s and 30s, and this continued through to the time period of LA Noire. Joseph John Ayupa, who was a Chicago mobster, managed Taylor & Company, which appeared to be a furniture factory, but was actually a front for the manufacturing of the illegal slot machines. In the game, the slot machine has a Ramez Removal sticker. Ramez Removals appeared to be a furniture removal company, but it was actually a front for hiding morphine in hidden compartments in the furniture, such as slot machines. The dark and twisted vines of the illegal distribution continued in another Vice case, Manifest Destiny, which we'll go into later. The second Vice case, titled Reefer Madness, depicts the fall of a citywide marijuana distribution ring. The title is from the 1936 film Reefer Madness, and the movie's plot revolves around the events that take place after high school students are coerced into using marijuana, also known as reefer. In November 1947, a ring of marijuana peddlers was broken by police. This ring was peddling reefer to both high school students and adults, and it was said to have been led by a man called Lynn D. Talbot. Police stated that they traced the drugs partially through an informant and partially through the arrest of a dozen men who were distributing it. In the game, a tip from Freddie Coolin led to the killing of Juan Garcia Cruz, which then led to the distributing centre of narcotics. This distributing centre of narcotics was fronted by the Parnell Soup Company, where trucks were offloading crates of marijuana having travelled from Tijuana, Mexico, and they were then being packaged into soup cans. In Lynn's doping scheme, narcotics squad officers said that Lynn made periodic trips to Mexico and picked up marijuana from them below the border. He then brought them back in sealed cans bearing food labels, which looked just like cans of soup. 2 cans of soup were found in Lynn's home, whereas in LA Noire, many cans of soup were found in Juan Garcia Cruz's house. Both in the game and real life, many of the drug ring dealers were arrested. In LA Noire, once making your way to Mazinke Metal Workshop, it was revealed that the boss behind this was Victor Sanders. Lynn D. Talbot actually ended up being an alias for 41-year-old Victor C. Sanders, who was thought to be the head of the whole operation. Known as the brains of the ring, he was the centrepiece of the largest single dope case found in 20 years, with $150,000 worth of marijuana found in 3 wardrobes that he was borrowing from his mother for storage. But in LA Noire, Victor Sanders doesn't have much revealed about him, with Team Bondi's depiction of this story showing him more as a gang boss in order to assist later timelines. It was alluded that in the game, Sanders would end up being released, but in real life, he was arrested and charged with buying drugs in Mexico and shipping them to Los Angeles. The setup is a case that follows the plight of professional boxer Albert Hammond, who won a fight against Kid Galahad, whom he was meant to have let win. Gangster Mickey Cohen urged Albert Hammond's manager, Carlo Aguero, to force Hammond to take a dive. The rumour of Hammond's loss spread, causing a prize win racket, with many individuals, including Roy Earle, putting money on Hammond to lose. However, Hammond resented this and actually placed bets on himself, ultimately winning the fight and taking all the winnings. This could be inspired by the story of Rocky Graziano, a middleweight champion from New York, who was offered $100,000 to throw the fight against Reuben Cowboy Shank of Denver. Rocky originally thought the man was offering the 100 grand was joking, saying, "Sure, give me the 100 grand. But when the same guy came to him again, he realised that the mysterious man was not kidding at all. Graziano realised that if he was going to win the fight, he would have been double-crossing people who had a bet on his opponent, on the basis of the 2 meetings that he originally had with the mysterious man. So he ended up feigning a sore back as an excuse to not fight. Different to real life, Albert Hammond didn't back down, winning the fight and angering many of the people who placed a sure bet on him. One of them being mobster Mickey Cohen. Mickey Cohen is a character based upon a Los Angeles gangster with the same name, who operated in Los Angeles, running a newly created casino sportsbook operation. Mickey Cohen once confided in Hearst editor Jim Richardson, "You want to know how my gambling money is made? We need only one fixed fight or horse race a year in each territory. 10 or 12 of these a year around the country. The word goes out and you get the big bets down." This is what happened in the setup case, except that the fixed fight ended up not being fixed at all, angering Cohen deeply. If we look into Mickey Cohen deeper, a lot of the vice cases could be seen with parallels of his life. Going back to the first vice case, the Black Caesar, Cohen's fictional brother-in-law, Finkelstein, is running Polar Bear Ice Company as a front for the drug operation. In real life, Cohen started working with his brothers actually owning a proper drugstore. Similar to this case, Mickey was also a professional boxer, finishing his career with 8 wins, 8 losses and 5 draws. So the boxing could also have been inspired by his earlier career as well. But that's enough of Mickey for now, we'll hear more about him later on. The Naked City reunites Phelps with his previous partners, Rusty Galloway and Stephen Bukowski, where Julia Randall was found dead in a bathtub, apparently drowning. But Julia was actually murdered, having been overdosed with morphine. This case's name and plot is from the 1948 film The Naked City, where Jean Dexter is knocked out with chloroform and is drowned in her bathtub. The rest of the case, if not all of it, mirrors The Naked City, so this case is quite accurate to the film rather than history. The final vice case, Manifest Destiny, a triple homicide has taken place, with evidence of more morphine shipments. Phelps and Earl go to the Mocambo Club, where they interview Mickey Cohen and his bodyguard Johnny Stoppanato. Stoppanato mentions to Phelps that he too is a Marine. Mickey Cohen's bodyguard in real life is also Johnny Stoppanato, who was a United States Marine and then later becoming Mickey Cohen's bodyguard. As the case progresses, Phelps and Earl are chasing gang members from crime scene to crime scene, with Mickey Cohen's men involved in what later transpires to be a mob war, killing members of the 6th Marine, which Phelps was part of. In the same time period of the game, Mickey Cohen himself was on the opposite end of this mob war, with many members of his crime family being killed by a rival gang led by Jack Dagner. The story of this case also seems heavily fictionalised, with not many articles appearing in the newspapers of that time being similar to this. But the one main issue surrounding around the morphine addiction was a real world issue. After World War II, there was a surplus of morphine, and smuggling morphine was not only an issue in Los Angeles, but all around the world. In Paris, on the 8th of January of 1947, officials seized over 4,000 vials of morphine, stating that they were stolen by a railway worker from a German railway truck, with the intent to have been able to sell them on the black market with the use of 2 other sellers. Nearing the end of this case, Phelps becomes suspended from duty, with pictures of his affair being exposed. This has been set up and cultivated by Roy Earl, in order for the media to deviate their story away from the corrupt Vice Squad to the fall of a high-profile detective. Credit goes to Real Pixels for this connection, but there are very strong connections to real-life Vice Squad Sergeant Charles F. Stoker. Charles Stoker was known as an honest cop, someone who could not be bought. On the 5th of May 1948, Vice Squad officers kicked in the door of a hillside house, with detectives believing they had found a rich and widespread prostitution ring. Lists were found containing many prominent names from film and radio. The madam of the house, 30-year-old Brenda Allen, was arrested, while a lady of the night, Carol Jones, was also arrested, complaining that she didn't think she could be pinched here. Brenda Allen herself warned detectives that if you're smart, you'll let that trick go. Policewoman Audrey Davis testified that Brenda had offered her $300 for 6 days' work in her Sunset Strip house, with Audrey having been recommended by a mutual friend. A year later, in the middle of 1949, recordings began to surface of Brenda Allen being with other police officers, while Brenda was also allegedly in the car of Vice Squad Sergeant E.V. Jackson. With murmurs of Vice Squad corruption in the LAPD spreading, the grand jury issued a subpoena to produce the recordings of the telephone conversation. And curiously, this was served to police scientist Ray Pinker. In LA Noire, Ray Pinker is also an investigator attached to the Scientific Investigation Division. Audrey Davis later backpedaled about her conversation that she had with Brenda, saying that she did it because she was in love with Stoker, and she did not want him to return to his wife, who he was having difficulties with at the time. Stoker denied this and claimed that this was the influence of the corrupt underworld of the police, who were just trying to take him down. Ultimately, Stoker was demoted to being a uniformed officer, along with his partner J.D. Ruggles, who supported Stoker's testimony throughout the trials and jeopardies. Even though the Stoker and Allen incident was mentioned as a parallel incident to Phelps' story, there are many similarities that we can note, from the corrupt Vice Squad to the list of demotions. But instead of being demoted down to a beat cop like Stoker and the others, Phelps was demoted to arson, the last desk of LA Noire. The Gas Man follows Phelps and his new partner, Herschel Biggs, across a series of house fires caused while the occupants are meant to be away, having won a prize. Insta-heat workers would then tamper with the water heater, fill up their house with gas, and use a mosquito coil to explode the houses, reducing it to rubble. This may have been inspired by an incident that occurred on the 5th of December 1947, where arson investigators combed the wreckage of what remained of a two-storey house, with them seeking the cause of the explosion. The owners of the house, two retired schoolteachers, had left their home to visit a friend. This was so that the three fumigators could fumigate the house. The gas had been pouring into the house for about 10 minutes when a spark triggered the explosion, crumbling the building like a piece of tissue paper. One of the fumigation workers, Fred Lopez, adamantly stated that the utilities had been shut off and the house was sealed. But what if someone had maliciously turned the water heater back on? Perhaps LA Noire used this as inspiration for their case. A walk in Elysian Fields continues the investigation of exploded houses, with Dudley Foreman, the neighbour of one of the burnt houses, being a witness. Curiously, Foreman does mention exterminators having been around the house for the past few days, which could be another link back to our real-life house explosion article. Firebug Herbert Chapman was identified as the chief suspect for these house fires, and when approached, hijacked a trolley to try and escape. A little further away from Los Angeles, in Baltimore on February 1948, a trolley was stolen. The legitimate operator of the vehicle, Andrew Pugh, had left it momentarily before it had been stolen, going up Eastern Avenue before taking a turn, and then finally crashing into a car, where the trolley driver then fled the scene. There are a few differences and similarities between the LA Noire case and this recorded case. In LA Noire, the trolley was on rails, while the Baltimore hijacking was a trackless trolley. In both cases, these trolleys were ridden recklessly, through red lights, and there only being a handful of occupants on board at the time. And while the trolley in Baltimore hit a car that stopped its escape, the LA Noire trolley doesn't stop until Phelps and Higgs disable it, killing Chapman, while the Baltimore driver manages to escape. Ultimately, Herbert Chapman, a man who loved fire, was then linked to the burning of all the houses while the occupants had been away. This may have been inspired by the arsonist known as the Hollywood Hotfoot. Police were left puzzled over an arsonist, the Hollywood Hotfoot, who had set at least 8 Hollywood homes on fire. Earl H. Young of the Arson Squad said that all 8 fires followed the same pattern. The arsonist would break in while the occupants were away, set the fires, and then vanish without taking any loot. LA Noire just seemingly adds a more sinister motive behind this narrative. A House of Sticks is the first case where you can control insurance investigator Jack Kelso. Kelso, like Phelps, is a former United States Marine, being a sergeant in the 6th Marines, which Phelps was lieutenant of. Jack Kelso could have taken inspiration from California United States Marine Jack Kelso, who fought, died, and received the Medal of Honor in the Korean War that occurred after the events of LA Noire. Kelso investigates a suspicious insurance payout of Belchwater, with foul play being suspected as there was such an incredibly large payout. Buck Walker was a worker in the Elysian Fields development, but while working on one of the houses, the roof collapsed on him, killing him. It was discovered that this was due to the use of poor building materials, such as reused lumber from the closed down Keystone Film Company. Soon it was revealed the true extent of corruption in what was known as the Suburban Redevelopment Fund, in which they had the Elysian Fields Development build houses with cheap and inferior materials in order to inflate the land's value at the lowest possible cost. Eventually, the federal government would then purchase the land for a planned interstate highway system, and ultimately line the pockets of Munro and other corrupt investors, some of which were Mayor Bowron and Police Chief Worrell, full of money. The name Elysian in Elysian Fields Development could be a reference to the Elysian Valley neighbourhood in Los Angeles, where in the 1950s the Golden State Freeway was constructed through it, with several hundred houses having to be demolished for it. Building contractor William Albany constructed homes during 1946 and 1947, but he didn't build them according to the plant specifications. These buildings were built with inferior and unsuitable materials, with Albany estimating the cement and labour cost was $245, whereas his records actually show that they were only $119. Albany had also partnered with real estate agents Richard Vale and Wade Howes. They were selling these houses to veterans, and housing for veterans had a ceiling price the sellers weren't supposed to sell their houses above. Albany managed to sell above these ceiling prices by making the veterans pay for both the property first and then the house on top of that, and disguised it so that the veterans were seemingly purchasing the lots from the Southern Realty Co., where in reality, Albany had already purchased them. Vale was a member of the American Legion National Housing Commission, potentially a place of power to help fraud the veterans. The Bank of America was also in cahoots with Albany and his crew, with the officers who financed the loans aware that the amounts made to purchase these houses were in excess of these government-imposed ceilings. This was as deep as the plot and corruption went, with no murder cover-ups or mass government corruption brought into play. But perhaps this was the basis of the much more sinister LA Noire story. This suburban story is carried through in a polite invitation and a different kind of war. But the last arson case we'll talk about, Nicholson Electroplating, tells another story. Phelps and Biggs' conversation about the Suburban Redevelopment Fund was interrupted by a massive explosion, happening a couple of blocks away from them. Arriving at the scene, at the centre of the rubble, was once an industrial plant, more notably the Nicholson Electroplating plant. This incident is one that Rockstar had disclosed their roots of inspiration, and in this case, it was the shocking explosion of the O'Connor Electroplating, which occurred on the morning of the 20th of February 1947. In both of these cases, the explosion appeared like a mushroom cloud, with many initially panicking that it was an atomic bomb being dropped on Los Angeles. This explosion was actually because the electroplating plant were trying to discover some new chemistry, a new chemical formula to help clean aluminium. The head scientist at the electroplating company, Howard McClellan at Nicholson, and Dr. Robert McGee at O'Connor devised a mixture of perchloric acid and acetic anhydride in order to clean the aluminium. Before the explosion, the head scientist had hired a young assistant, Tomoka Okomoko at Nicholson and Elisa Eba at O'Connor, who he was training on how to use the mixture. When Ray Pinker is examining the mixture that was developed by the scientists at the plating company, he states that the mixture would need to be constantly cooled or else it would explode. At the O'Connor factory, this mixture was under refrigeration, but there was no reason given for why the mixture had to be below 85 degrees. And the foreman at the time, Fred Bauer, found that the refrigeration motor was getting warm, and he wanted to give it a chance to cool off, so he switched off the motor, with Dr. McGee saying it was fine. It was not fine though. The mixture ended up exploding, with a 210-gallon mixture exploding at the O'Connor factory, whereas only a 100-gallon mixture exploded at Nicholson. Both of these explosions, however, had a huge impact, damaging and destroying many buildings. In real life, this explosion was actually a breakaway into live coverage on television, and this is subtly referenced in LA Noire.
The mayor is going on television, appealing for calm.
Authorities questioned that even when refrigerated, why any scientist would store a mixture of that large quality in a well-populated area. In O'Connor's situation, it was revealed that Robert McGee had actually forged his education and qualifications, with his assistant also having only graduated from high school. In the game, this area of the case isn't covered, with the detective work going into the more fictional route of there being industrial espionage, with a new chemical process on how to polish aluminium being stolen both by the assistant and discovered spy Okamoto, as well as McClellan attempting to sell the process to American businessman Howard Hughes. In the real life time period when LA Noire was depicted, Howard Hughes was also a businessman and a pilot, with his address to the press in the intro of LA Noire about his new plane, the Spruce Goose, being close, if not the same, to actual events. LA Noire is a video game that has been heavily influenced by real life events, and does extremely well illustrating these events that may become lost in the history books. There is much more historically influenced content to LA Noire, other than just the death cases, with the environments, the flashbacks, and much more, all being heavily researched with history around that time. The 1940s for Los Angeles was full of crimes of passion and ingenuity, with many pieces of work being inspired by the events of this time. LA Noire successfully submerses us in these times, intertwining their own interpretation for how many unsolved and unanswered stories could have been concluded.